Now, let's take a look at how now we report everything, the outline of the report, okay? So, when we report, guys, there's a certain outline I'd like you to follow. That is because in general, there are of course many different ways you can report, but the one I'd like to suggest to both of you is something that your examiner actually expects you to use. Now, how many paragraphs do you notice in the sample below? There are how many?
5 each.
No,
four
how many paragraphs? Yes, there are 4. Okay, so the outline itself needs only 4 paragraphs. Let's take a look at each of the paragraphs there. Can you read, Miss Betty, paragraph 1? Oh, this one over here, yes. Sample 1.
The linear graph compares information about the number of people aged 65 and above in Japan, Sweden, and the USA from 1940 to 2040.
Okay, so what's that information over here? Okay, if you notice, guys, this line just basically tells the reader what the report is about. So in other words, your paragraph 1 is an introduction, which is basically going to be just a paraphrase of given description. If you notice, it says here at the top, the graph below shows, we write the linear graph compares, right? What does it compare? Information about the number of people aged 65 and above. That's basically the proportion of the population aged 65 and over, right? I'm referring to the description at the top over here and comparing it with here at the bottom. Are you guys there? Okay. So if you take a look at the description here, you can compare it here with the one at the bottom. In which particular periods from 1940 to 2040, instead of copying between 1940 and 2040, we use instead the words from and to. Now, instead of just copying the words in 3 different countries that's over here in the original description, we instead write the names of the countries themselves, right? So we quote Japan, Sweden, and the USA. So in other words, besides just basically paraphrasing the information, you can also get information from the figure itself, okay? So you may also use information from the figure to sort of incorporate everything to make the description more informative, okay? Now, take a look at, guys, the verb shows. You can also copy the word show here, or you could just use the word compare, because the whole point of the graph is to compare 3 countries, right? How different are their population profiles of these kinds of people? Okay, so that's your paragraph 1. It's basically just a paraphrase. In fact, you can do this in the first 2 to 3 minutes of your reporting time. That's the easiest part of the report. Now let's take a look at the second paragraph. Can you read, please, Joy?
Overall, it can be seen that the number of senior citizens in all countries will increase very significantly in 2040, representing at least a fifth of their populations. Noticeably, Japan will experience the most significant change, whereas Sweden and the USA have nearly parallel figures in almost all years.
Okay. Now, what is the kind of information we have here? Let's reflect on that. By using the word overall, what are we trying to highlight here? What do you think, Joanne?
It only shows the lowest and the highest point of
Did it mention the highest and the lowest here? Like in the case of...
like the number of the senior citizen at each.
Is there a mention of that, the highest and the lowest here? Well, what do you think, Miss Betty? What is this paragraph all about? What does this show?
It shows that by 2040, all the population of that range of ages for all the countries for US will increase.
So in other words, is information about just one country or all countries? It's all of the countries involved. What we have over here is now the summary. Okay, this is the part where you now summarize the information. Can you recall the expectation I told you about earlier? The examiner expects you to summarize the information. Okay. Now we also call it, guys, an overview paragraph. Okay. Some people call it the overall trend. Okay, but it's basically a summary. Okay, that's different from a conclusion. Okay, because a conclusion is usually at the end of the report or something, and it basically just recaps the main points. But a summary is like the gist, the overall thought, the most important thought. In other words, the second paragraph tells the reader what in general is this report all about really. Okay? So therefore, you need to have that summary paragraph or an overview paragraph, which means that even before you report, you should have a good idea what the graph, is all about. Okay? And you therefore establish the patterns and the trends. So the summary of the overview is the gist. The gist of the report. Okay. It basically is a statement that shows us what in general does it show. Now, how do we do that? That's a very important question. What you can do, guys, is basically highlight a couple of things. One, you can highlight the similarities that you find in all the items involved. Okay. You can also emphasize the general dissimilarities or differences. If you notice, the very first sentence of this paragraph 2 tells us something about the general similarity. And that general similarity is that all of these countries will have at least a fifth of their populations representing the old people in 2040. You see that? There's also a mention of the general difference. Why? Because it's quoted that Japan will have the most significant change. Look at the adjective most significant, whereas it's contrasted against other two countries, Sweden and USA, that will have nearly the same figures in almost all years. Okay? So therefore, what you can do here is mention these two important points. Now, this is a very important bit because what you write here, guys, in the summary will basically be supported in the follow-up paragraphs. That's why the anchor idea simply mentions exactly what in general, the report is, and what follows just simply supports that idea. Okay? That's why if you take a look at the succeeding paragraphs here, paragraphs 3 and 4, okay, what follows are just the details. Okay. Can I ask you to read both paragraphs? Let me just check the one downstairs. Okay, hold on.